Take that piece of trash off or get out of my courtroom. How much longer are you going to disgrace the Vance family?" Those were the words my stepfather, Judge Arthur Vance, roared as he humiliated me in front of an entire courtroom. At the prosecution table, my stepsister covered her mouth with a smug grin, savoring every second of my public disgrace. I stood silently at the witness stand, still wearing the blood-stained tactical jacket I had worn after 36 straight hours of life-saving surgery. With ruthless cruelty, he ordered me to strip it off, determined to take away the last shred of dignity his stepdaughter had left. Slowly, I reached for the zipper with my scar-covered hand. My entire family looked on with satisfaction, convinced they had finally crushed me. But my arrogant stepfather had no idea that his insults had just echoed into the courthouse hallway. A 4-star Special Operations General froze the instant he heard my call sign. The very next second, the massive oak courtroom doors were kicked wide open. Before I show you how this family's fake power was shattered into pieces, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you also believe that sometimes the cruelest people in our lives are the very ones who share our blood. The echo of Arthur's voice slammed against the wood-paneled walls of courtroom 7B. Then dead silence. The kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that drops right before an ambush in hostile territory. The air in the room tasted stale, thick with the smell of industrial lemon pledge wood polish and the overpowering, expensive cologne Arthur practically bathed in. I didn't flinch. Muscle memory took over before my brain even fully processed the insult. Feet shoulder-width apart. Core engaged. Center of gravity locked in tight against the polished floorboards of the witness stand. I clamped my jaw shut, grinding my back teeth together. I wasn't going to give him a single ounce of fear. If they wanted a weak little victim to cry and beg for their approval, they picked the wrong girl. My eyes tracked up to the bench. Arthur leaned back in his high-backed leather chair, deliberately crossing one leg over the other. He reached up casually, smoothing out a microscopic crease in his black judicial robe before adjusting his shiny silk tie. The man was a walking billboard for fake authority. A perfectly ironed shell built to cover up the rotten, suffocating patriarchy stinking up the Vance family tree. He looked down his nose at me, like I was a stray dog tracking wet mud onto his imported rugs. To Arthur and to the rest of his country club elite circle, my job was a joke. Stitching up blown-apart bodies, pulling bullets out of gang kids at 3 in the morning, dealing with the raw, messy reality of keeping people alive that was low-class garbage. It wasn't clean paper pushing. It didn't come with stock options or golf course memberships. To him, my military service and my medical degree were just a giant, dirty embarrassment. Down at the prosecution table, Evelyn shifted her weight. She leaned back against her mahogany chair, her manicured fingers drumming a slow, arrogant rhythm on the table. Tap, tap, tap. The massive diamond on her engagement ring caught the harsh glare of the overhead fluorescent lights. She wore a tailored white blazer that probably cost more than a rookie cop's monthly salary. Evelyn shot me a look that made my stomach turn a nasty little cocktail of absolute disgust and fake pity. She leaned over, whispering something into the ear of Detective Paul Grimes, sitting right next to her. The dirty cop chuckled, a low, wet sound that barely carried over the hum of the central air conditioning. He wiped a hand across his 5 o'clock shadow, his cheap suit wrinkling as he leaned in closer to my stepsister. Both of them smirked, their eyes locked on me. In their minds, I was already a trapped rat, a broken veteran who lost her mind and brought her filthy, blood-stained rags into their pristine temple of law. They owned this room. They owned the judge. They thought they had the whole game rigged. I shifted my gaze away from the trash and looked over at the defense table. Elias Thorne sat there, a former Army Ranger. A ghost of a man who knew more about actual honor than anyone else in this room combined. Thick, heavy steel cuffs locked his massive wrists to the arms of the wooden chair. You could see the raw red chafe marks on his skin where the metal had been digging into his bones for hours. Every time he shifted his weight, the chains clinked. A harsh, metallic scrape against the dead quiet of the room. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with the deep, bruised bags of a man who hadn't slept in days. When he saw Arthur screaming at me, saw me taking the hit for him just by standing there, Elias subtly shook his head. his jaw clenched so hard a thick blue vein throbbed at his temple. He didn't have to say a word. I knew exactly what he was transmitting across the room. Don't do it, Valkyrie. Don't take this abuse from your own family. Let it go. He was ready to take the fall. He was ready to go to a state penitentiary for a crime he didn't commit just to spare me the public humiliation of standing up against my own stepfather. The sheer, quiet sacrifice of this ranger. It was like pouring gasoline on a block of ice. The cold anger sitting in my chest crystallized into something sharp, calculated, and deadly. Bang! Arthur brought the wooden gavel down hard. The sharp crack made half the gallery flinch in their seats. The central AC pumped freezing air through the overhead vents, but the room felt like it was rapidly running out of oxygen. I said, "Take it off," Arthur barked, leaning far over the bench, his face flushing a furious, ugly red. "This is a court of law, not a back alley triage tent. You will show respect in my house." He wanted me stripped. He wanted the black sheep of the family exposed, neutralized, and shamed in front of a gallery full of strangers, local reporters, and the wealthy politicians whose pockets he lived in. He wanted to remind everyone that he was the king, and I was just the dirt beneath his shiny leather loafers. I lowered my eyes. I looked down at the dark, rusted brown stain crusted into the camouflage fabric of my tactical jacket. Blood. Not mine. Slowly, deliberately, I raised my left hand. The skin across the back of my hand was a permanent map of twisted, raised burn scars and deep shrapnel divots. My index finger and thumb found the cold, hard metal of the zipper right at my collarbone. I pinched it tight, feeling the cold steel bite into the thick calluses on my fingertips. My pulse didn't spike. My breathing stayed dead even. To understand exactly what this blood cost, and why I would rather die than take this jacket off, you have to go back 36 hours. 36 hours before Arthur Vance ordered me to strip in his courtroom, I wasn't standing in a clean, oak-paneled sanctuary. I was knee-deep in the kind of ugly, violent reality he paid good money to ignore. Trauma Bay 4, San Diego County General. No polished wood or plush leather chairs here. Just stark white linoleum, slick with bodily fluids, and the harsh, blinding glare of overhead surgical lights. The air in the room was thick. It smelled like raw iron, cold sweat, and cheap isopropyl alcohol. A 20-year-old kid lay strapped to the steel table. A gang dispute over on the south side had left him with a punctured lung and a shattered ribcage. His breathing was a wet, ragged rattle that echoed off the tile walls. "Clear the line," I barked. My voice cut through the chaos of the nurses and residents. I didn't yell. I never yell. Panic kills patience. I leaned over the table, my undershirt clinging to my spine, drenched in sweat. I gripped the thick plastic of the chest tube. I anchored my stance and pulled. The internal pressure released with a sickening, heavy squelch. Dark arterial blood sprayed upward in a sudden arc. It splattered hard against the right side of my chest, soaking instantly through my scrubs and running down my sleeve. I didn't flinch. I grabbed a stack of heavy gauze, packed the open wound, and held the pressure with both hands. The heart monitor next to my ear shrieked a high-pitched, rapid warning. Then, slowly, the rhythm steadied. The flatline backed off. We pulled him back from the edge. I stepped back and peeled off my latex gloves. The rubber snapped sharply against my wrists, leaving angry red welts. I tossed the bloody mess into the biohazard bin. This was my life. I patched up the torn, bleeding garbage of the city. The kind of people my stepfather would step over on his way to a country club brunch without losing a single second of sleep. To the Vance family, this job wasn't heroic. It was the ultimate insult. They never saw the lives I pulled out of the grave. They only saw the dirt under my fingernails. I remembered standing in the grand foyer of Arthur's $2 million estate 3 years ago, right after my last deployment. My heavy combat boots had left a few faint tracks of dried mud on the imported Persian rug. My mother had stood at the top of the sweeping staircase, holding a crystal glass of Chardonnay. She looked down at my uniform. Her upper lip curled in pure, unfiltered disgust. "Can you not find a respectable job, Nicole?" Her voice was thin, dripping with that fake high society disappointment. "Something clean. Evelyn just got her promotion at the district attorney's office. You look like a common day laborer." I had said nothing. I just looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the shiny new Mercedes parked in the driveway. Evelyn's car. Bought and paid for using a loophole in a joint banking trust that legally siphoned off my military hazard pay. They took my combat money earned in the desert surrounded by gunfire to buy a luxury sedan for the golden child. Meanwhile, my actual career was treated like a dirty family secret. A blue-collar embarrassment they had to explain away at their dinner parties. 11:47 a.m. The emergency room doors finally stopped spinning. My shift was over. I walked into the staff locker room. The concrete floor radiated a freezing chill right through the thin soles of my hospital shoes. Every muscle in my back burned a deep, grinding ache that settled into the bone. I stood in front of locker 42. The cheap metal door squealed a high, rusty protest when I yanked it open. I reached inside and grabbed my jacket. Olive drab, heavy tactical canvas. It smelled like old rain gun oil and desert dust. I slid my arms into the stiff sleeves, feeling the familiar weight settle across my shoulders. I reached across with my left hand, running my thumb over the right shoulder pad. There, clinging tightly to a worn, frayed strip of Velcro, was a single patch. Black threads stitched into a dark background. Valkyrie 9. It wasn't just a piece of clothing to keep the cold out. It was armor. Every time I put it on, it blocked out the suffocating, pathetic noise of my family. It reminded me that out there in the real world, I wasn't a failure or a disappointment. I was the one people prayed for when the sky was falling. I grabbed my canvas duffel bag. I needed a blistering hot shower. I needed to scrub the dried blood off my chest, wash the smell of the hospital out of my hair, and put on a stiff, uncomfortable suit to play their little legal games at the courthouse. Then my phone vibrated hard against the cold metal bench. The screen lit up the dim locker room. A text message from David Ross, the public defender I practically forced onto the case. Jury pool is locked in. Grimes and Evelyn are squeezing him hard in the holding cell. Elias is going to take the plea deal. Get here now. I stared at the glowing white letters. The air completely left my lungs. Elias was giving up. The stubborn, silent Army Ranger who never backed down from a fight was about to let a corrupt judge and a spoiled prosecutor ruin his life. He was going to plead guilty to a felony he didn't commit just so Evelyn could boost her conviction rate and Arthur could secure his political donations from the Sterling family. I looked down at the dark, wet stain soaking into the camouflage fabric over my heart. There was no time for a shower, no time to play dress-up and pretend to be part of the Vance family's pristine world. I shoved the phone into my pocket. I grabbed my truck keys, the jagged metal edges biting sharply into my palm. I walked out of the locker room, the heavy rubber soles of my boots slamming hard against the linoleum. They thought Elias was standing alone. They thought they could crush a decorated veteran behind closed doors, and nobody would care. I pushed through the heavy double glass doors into the blinding San Diego sunlight. I would rather let my family tear me apart piece by piece in open court than abandon the only man who ever looked at my scars and saw a human being. I threw my truck into gear, gripped the steering wheel, and slammed my foot on the gas. 8 months ago, I was hiding in plain sight. The local Veterans Affairs Center wasn't a place you went to feel better. It was a holding pen for ghosts. The air in the rec room always smelled like old floor wax and cheap drip coffee that had been left on the burner way too long. The ceiling fan overhead wobbled on its axis, clicking with every rotation. Click, clack, click, clack. It sounded like a faulty firing pin. I sat in the back corner. I wore a bright orange volunteer lanyard over my plain gray hoodie. It was a shield. If they thought I was just some civilian pushing a cart of stale donuts, they didn't look too closely at the twisted, raised burn tissue crawling up my left arm. They didn't ask questions. I didn't have to lie. I just poured the coffee and wiped down the cheap folding tables. That was where I first saw Elias Thorne. He sat 3 rows across from me, ex-Army Ranger. He wore a faded flannel shirt and heavy work boots that had seen miles of bad road. He didn't talk to the counselors. He didn't look at the pamphlets piled up by the door. He just sat there, arms crossed over his chest, staring at the blank wall. He carried that heavy, suffocating silence you only see in guys who have zipped up too many body bags. It's a specific kind of gravity. You can't fake it. We didn't speak. We didn't have to. Real recognizes real. We both knew how to scan a room for exits. We both kept our backs to the wall. By 4 o'clock, the California sun dipped behind the concrete buildings outside. The ancient heating system in the VA was shot and the temperature in the room plummeted. The cold seeped through the thin glass windows right into my bones. Then the fire started. It always hit without warning. The shrapnel from the IED had chewed up the median nerve in my left wrist. When the temperature dropped, the damaged nerve endings misfired. It felt like someone driving a rusted nail straight through my joint and twisting it hard. I ground my teeth together. My breath hitched. I grabbed my left wrist with my right hand, squeezing the joint with bone-crushing force to choke off the pain signals. I hunched over in my plastic chair, staring a hole into the scuffed linoleum floor. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. If I were sitting in the Vance family living room, right then I knew exactly what would happen. Evelyn would look up from her phone, roll her eyes, and let out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Are you doing that on purpose, Nicole?" She would sneer, her voice dripping with venom. "Seriously, you just have to make everything about you. Stop faking it for attention. You're embarrassing yourself." My mother would sip her expensive white wine and look away, ashamed that her daughter wasn't perfect. Arthur would tell me to go to another room because my grimacing was ruining his evening. In that house, my physical pain was an inconvenience. My combat scars were an eyesore. I was a broken tool they wanted to throw back in the toolbox. I was supposed to suffer quietly so I didn't ruin their country club aesthetic. Here in the VA, the crowd just ignored me. Everyone had their own demons. Nobody had the energy to care about mine. Then I heard them. Heavy, deliberate footsteps coming across the floor. I braced myself. I expected a counselor with a clipboard and a fake smile, asking if I needed to do some deep breathing exercises. I tightened my grip on my wrist, ready to tell them to back off. I didn't look up. The footsteps stopped right next to my chair. It was Elias. He didn't offer a pathetic, empty platitude. He didn't look at my mangled hand with that sickening mix of horror and pity that civilians always get in their eyes. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew damn well I wasn't. Elias reached into the cheap plastic cooler sitting on the table next to us. I heard the rough crunch of ice. He pulled out a generic plastic water bottle. Condensation dripped down the sides, leaving a wet trail on the floor. He gripped the bottle with his massive calloused hand, twisted the plastic cap off, and dropped it into the trash. A sharp final sound. Then he knelt down. Without a single word, he reached out. He didn't grab my arm. He didn't try to hold my hand or offer fake comfort. He just pressed the icy, sweating plastic of that water bottle directly against the inflamed, throbbing skin of my left wrist. The shock of the freezing cold was instantaneous. It bit deep into the damaged tissue. It shocked the misfiring nerves into submission. The white-hot agony in my joint dulled down to a manageable, hollow ache. The muscles in my neck finally relaxed. I looked up. My chest was heaving. I met his eyes. They were dark, tired, and completely empty of judgment. He held the bottle there for 10 long seconds, counting the beats, letting the cold do its job. Then he stood up, left the cold water bottle resting in my lap, turned around, and walked out the glass doors into the parking lot. He didn't look back. He didn't want a thank you. He didn't want a medal. I sat there in the quiet room, gripping that freezing piece of cheap plastic. The cold soaked into my skin, numbing the physical pain. But it did something else too. It soothed the raw, bleeding exhaustion inside my chest. In 10 seconds, a total stranger had given me more dignity and understanding than the people who shared my blood had given me in my entire life. Elias Thorne saw the ugly, broken parts of me, and he didn't flinch. He didn't call it a burden. He just gave me exactly what I needed to survive the moment. He was my kind of people. He was my blood far more than the sociopath sitting at my mother's dinner table. A guy like that doesn't ask for help. A guy like that takes the hit for the people he protects. And exactly 3 weeks ago, in a filthy alley behind a liquor store, Elias Thorne took a hit that my family decided to turn into a life sentence. 3 weeks ago. 11:42 p.m. A filthy dead-end alley behind a liquor store on 4th Street. The air was heavy. It smelled like stale beer, rotting dumpster juice, and wet asphalt. A broken neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sick red glow on the pavement. Sarah Jenkins was 24. She was just taking the trash out after a minimum wage shift. Julian Sterling was 25. He was trust fund trash with a bad cocaine habit and a god complex. Julian pinned Sarah against the brick wall. He pressed a 4-inch folding knife tight against her throat. The cold steel dug deep into her skin. She screamed, a raw, terrified sound that cut straight through the city noise. Elias heard it. He was walking home. Ranger instincts don't just fade away with a discharge paper. He moved into the dark alley. Fast, silent, no hesitation, no warning shout. He grabbed Julian's right wrist, twisted hard. The radial bone snapped under the sudden pressure. A loud, wet crack echoed off the brick walls. Julian screamed, his fingers going limp. The knife hit the ground with a metallic clatter. Before the rich kid could even process the pain, Elias drove a heavy fist straight into Julian's jaw. The bone shattered. It sounded like a heavy work boot stepping on glass. Julian dropped to the wet asphalt. He convulsed. Bone fragments and thick blood instantly blocked his airway. His face turned a sick shade of purple. He was drowning on dry land. Elias didn't walk away. He didn't let the garbage die. He dropped to his knees, pulled a cheap plastic ballpoint pen from his jacket, and jammed it straight into Julian's trachea. He forced the airway open, holding the kid's head steady in the dirt until the sirens wailed. He saved the life of the punk who just tried to slaughter a girl. 2 hours later, San Diego County General. I was standing in the shadows of the supply closet near Trauma Bay 3. My back pressed flat against the cold plaster wall. Breathing slow, invisible. The sterile smell of bleach and iodine usually owned that hallway. Not tonight. Tonight the heavy, suffocating stench of a Cohiba cigar hung in the air. Richard Sterling, real estate billionaire, the man who owned half the city council. He wore a custom charcoal wool suit that cost more than a resident's yearly salary. He stood near the vending machines looking absolutely disgusted, like the hospital floor itself was infecting his expensive leather shoes. Evelyn stood across from him, my perfect ambitious stepsister, assistant district attorney. She smoothed down the lapels of her crisp white blazer. Her eyes were hungry. She was tracking the billionaire like a shark smelling blood in the water. "My son does not get a criminal record," Richard said. His voice was gravel, low, rough, and completely used to dictating reality. "He does not go to a state penitentiary. He is the victim here. He was attacked by a lunatic." Evelyn tilted her head. She knew the game better than anyone. "He had a knife, Richard. There is a witness. It's messy." Witnesses get confused, especially minimum wage clerks who need to pay rent. Richard took a slow drag of his cigar right under a bright red "no smoking" sign. He blew the thick gray smoke toward the ceiling. "Arthur's re-election campaign for the bench is coming up next month. It's expensive. I have a lot of friends with very deep pockets, Evelyn. Deep pockets looking for a reliable judge." Evelyn's jaw locked for a fraction of a second, then she smiled, a slow, greedy curve of her lips. She didn't care about Sarah Jenkins crying in the waiting room. She didn't care about the man who saved her. She just saw dollar signs and political leverage. Blood money to pave her way into the elite. "Consider it handled," Evelyn said. Her voice was ice. Detective Paul Grimes stepped out of the stairwell. He chewed on a toothpick, his cheap tie loosened at the collar. He gave Evelyn a slow, knowing nod. I watched it all happen, right there in the open. A masterclass in corruption. Under Evelyn's orders, Grimes walked over to a shredder in the nurse's station and fed the original incident report right into the blades. The paper whined as it turned to confetti. He made a phone call. By the next morning, Sarah Jenkins was threatened with eviction and fired from her job if she opened her mouth. The folding knife Julian used, gone. Evaporated from the chain of custody. The narrative flipped overnight. Elias Thorne wasn't a hero. According to the state of California, he was a broken, violent combat veteran who suffered a massive PTSD episode and brutally assaulted an innocent young man in an alley. An unprovoked attack. A danger to society. They built a cage of lies and locked Elias inside it, all to keep a billionaire's degenerate son clean and to buy a judge's seat for my stepfather. I stood in the dark corner of the trauma bay. My hands were shoved deep into the pockets of my scrubs. My fingernails dug hard into my own palms. I didn't step out into the hallway. I didn't scream at Evelyn. I didn't cry. Tears are a useless waste of hydration. Crying wouldn't get Elias out of handcuffs. My pulse dropped to a steady rhythm. My breathing slowed. The burning anger in my chest froze into solid ice. They were treating the legal system like their own personal ATM. They thought they could just buy and sell human lives like cattle. I watched Evelyn walk away, her high heels clicking a sharp rhythm down the linoleum hallway. She looked so proud, so arrogant. She thought she cleaned up the mess perfectly. I stepped backward, moving deeper into the hospital's shadow. Intelligence officers don't throw tantrums. They gather data. They lock down the perimeter. They wait for the enemy to expose their neck. Evelyn and Grimes thought they got rid of the knife. They thought they scrubbed the scene clean before the evidence could get officially logged into the system. But they made one massive, fatal mistake. They forgot who was running the trauma bay tonight. They forgot who stood over Julian Sterling's bleeding body when the paramedics rolled him through the double doors. They didn't know who personally cut the bloody jacket off the billionaire's son. 3 weeks ago, I stood flat against the cold plaster wall in the dark stretch of the hospital corridor, just out of the harsh fluorescent light. I heard every single word of that filthy deal between my stepsister and the real estate billionaire. My chest tightened. A sick, sour taste backed up in my throat. The pure, unfiltered greed radiating off Evelyn was enough to make my stomach turn. She was actually selling a man's life. Elias saved a girl from getting butchered in an alley, and Evelyn was packaging him up for a prison cell just to buy her father a judge's seat. But I didn't step out into the light. I didn't start screaming. I didn't throw a fit. Intelligence officers don't throw tantrums when they walk into an ambush. They freeze. They gather intel. They wait in the dark and find the exact spot to slide the knife in later. Evelyn thought she was so smart. Detective Grimes thought he was the ultimate fixer. They shredded the police report right there at the nurse's station. They scared off the witness. They built a perfect bulletproof lie to throw Elias in a cage and keep Julian Sterling walking free. I turned on my heel, silent. I walked away from the vending machines, leaving the heavy stench of Richard Sterling's Cohiba cigar behind. I headed straight back to the trauma bay's decontamination room. Dirty cops like Paul Grimes think they know everything about crime scenes. They know how to intimidate witnesses and make paperwork disappear. But they don't know a damn thing about emergency room protocols. When paramedics roll a bleeding body through those double doors, we don't politely undress them. We don't fold their clothes and ask for dry cleaning instructions. We cut. We use heavy serrated trauma shears, and we rip the clothing right off the body to find the wounds. Everything gets shoved into a plastic bin. It's basic ground-level procedure. Grimes was too busy kissing Richard Sterling's ass in the hallway to realize what had happened to Julian's clothes the second he hit the gurney. I pushed the heavy swinging door open. The decon room was empty. It smelled like raw bleach, wet copper, and old sweat. I walked over to the stainless steel counter. Sitting right in the middle was a clear plastic biohazard bin marked with Julian Sterling's patient ID barcode. Inside was his custom designer jacket, sliced wide open down the back, soaked dark with his own blood. I pulled a fresh pair of latex gloves from the wall dispenser. I slid them on. The rubber snapped loud and sharp against my wrists. A harsh, aggressive crack in the quiet room. I reached into the bin. The fabric of his expensive jacket was stiff, heavy with drying blood. I dug my hands into the ruined pockets, empty on the left. I shoved my right hand into the deep inner breast pocket. My fingertips hit something hard, cold metal, heavy. I pulled it out and held it up under the harsh, buzzing overhead light. A 4-inch folding knife. The handle was tactical-grade steel, scored for grip. The blade was still folded away, but the outer casing was smeared with thick, dark, crusted blood. Sarah Jenkins's blood. Julian hadn't had time to ditch it before Elias shattered his jaw. Grimes thought he erased the weapon. The idiot never even looked for it. My pulse didn't race. My hands were dead steady. A deep, cold thrill washed over me. The absolute rush of the hunt. I had their whole corrupt empire sitting right in the palm of my hand, and they were completely blind to it. I grabbed a heavy-duty plastic evidence bag from the supply rack. I dropped the knife inside, The metal clunked against the thick plastic. I pulled the heavy zip closure tight, sealing it off. I walked over to the administrative desk and pulled open the top drawer. I dragged out the official San Diego County General Hospital chain of custody pad. 3-part carbon paper, white for the police, pink for the hospital records, yellow for the intake officer. I grabbed a black pen. I pressed down hard on the paper, writing in sharp block letters. Item 1, folding knife approximately 4 inches. Recovered from the clothing of patient Julian Sterling. I signed the bottom line. Nicole Reese, MD, attending trauma surgeon. I grabbed the heavy red rubber stamp off the desk. I slammed it down on the paper. A loud, wet thud. Received and secured. I walked over to the electronic narcotic locker bolted into the back concrete wall. It was a solid steel box. I punched my personal 6-digit security code into the keypad. The heavy magnetic lock chirped. A loud, sharp beep. The thick steel door popped open. I tossed the sealed evidence bag inside. I slammed the door shut. The deadbolt engaged with a heavy, satisfying clack. That knife wasn't moving. The only way into that box was my thumbprint, my code, or a federal warrant. Let Grimes try to make that disappear. I walked back to the desk. I tore the yellow carbon copy off the pad. The receipt. The physical proof of exactly what was sitting in that locker. I folded the yellow paper in half. Then I folded it again, creasing the edges hard with my thumb. I shoved it deep into the inside breast pocket of my olive drab tactical jacket, right over my heart. I patted the heavy canvas once. Flash forward. Present day, courtroom 7B. The heavy, suffocating smell of Arthur's expensive cologne and the lemon wood polish on the benches. The cold, dry blast of the central air conditioning hitting the back of my neck. My scarred hand was still raised. My thumb and index finger clamped tight around the cold metal zipper of that exact same tactical jacket. Arthur Vance sat up on his high wooden bench, his face flushed an ugly, furious red. He banged his heavy wooden gavel again. The sound echoed off the walls. He screamed at me to take the jacket off. He called it trash. He wanted me stripped, exposed, and humiliated in front of his wealthy donors and his golden child daughter. He wanted to break me. He had absolutely no idea. The arrogant fool was staring right at his own death sentence. He was screaming at me to open the Pandora's box that was going to burn his entire corrupt family to the ground. The heavy silence in courtroom 7B shattered. "Are you deaf?" Arthur roared. He didn't even bother reaching for his wooden gavel. He slammed his bare, manicured palm flat against the thick mahogany bench. The sharp smack echoed off the high ceiling, cutting straight through the low mechanical hum of the central AC. "Bailiffs," he barked, pointing a thick, trembling finger right at my chest. "Step up there and strip that piece of garbage off the witness right now. She is making a mockery of my courtroom and insulting the dignity of this institution." 2 court security officers pushed off the back wall. Big guys, heavy-set, ex-city cops padding their pensions. The stiff black leather of their duty belts creaked and popped as they moved down the center aisle. The sound of their heavy boots thudding against the floorboards felt like a countdown clock ticking down to 0. Down at the prosecution table, Evelyn shifted her weight in her expensive leather chair. She crossed her arms, resting her sharp chin on her knuckles. A slow, sickening smile spread across her face. Her eyes were practically glowing under the harsh fluorescent lights. She was vibrating with excitement. She wanted this. She had waited years for this. She wanted to see her big sister physically restrained, stripped down, humiliated, and put in her place like a disobedient dog in front of half the city's political elite. Detective Grimes sat next to her, slowly rolling a splintered toothpick from one side of his mouth to the other, enjoying the free show. Over at the defense table, the heavy steel chains suddenly jerked. Clack, clack, scrape. Elias lunged forward. The thick, rusted metal cuffs dug deep into the raw skin of his wrists as he fought the restraints. The heavy wooden chair, bolted to the floor, groaned under his massive weight. He was a cornered animal forced to watch his own pack get attacked. "Judge, you don't have the right to do that," Elias yelled. His voice was raw, ragged from lack of sleep and too many hours in a concrete holding cell. He tried to stand, trying to force his massive frame between me and the approaching officers, but the heavy steel chains dragged him harshly back down into the seat. His chest heaved. A thick drop of sweat rolled down his bruised temple. I looked at him. Really looked at him. A man willing to throw his own life away in a rigged trial. A man willing to rot in a 6x8 cell, now tearing his own wrists to shreds just to save me from a bruised ego. That was it. The final string snapped. I let go of the cold metal zipper. I wasn't doing this anymore. I wasn't playing the good, quiet victim for the Vance family. Not today. Not ever again. My boots were planted solid on the polished floorboards of the witness stand. I dropped my center of gravity by half an inch. A microscopic shift. Just enough to load the tension tightly into my thighs and core. My body slipped completely out of civilian mode and locked right back into the dirt, into the sandbox. Blood running hot. Nerves completely iced over. The two bailiffs stepped up onto the wooden platform of the witness stand. The lead officer, a guy with a thick gray mustache and tired eyes, reached out. His thick fingers opened, reaching to grab the canvas collar of my tactical jacket. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my hands to block him. I didn't throw a punch. I just turned my head slowly and locked eyes with him. Dead center, pupil to pupil. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. I pitched my voice low, dropping it into that dry, hollow, dead-end register that only comes out when someone is about to get severely hurt. Don't touch me. 3 words. They dropped out of my mouth like lead weights hitting a concrete floor. The lead bailiff froze instantly. His hand stopped exactly 3 inches from my collarbone. He was an older guy. He probably saw a lot of bad things on the streets before taking this cushy courthouse job. His conscious brain might have been telling him to follow the rich judge's orders, but his gut, his raw, primitive survival instinct, was screaming at him to back away from the blast zone. He saw the dead flat look in my eyes. He saw a predator perfectly comfortable with extreme violence. He swallowed hard. He slowly lowered his hand. He took half a step backward, putting physical distance between us. His partner caught the vibe and did the exact same thing. They weren't getting paid enough to bleed on the judge's nice wood floors. Up on the bench, Arthur saw them back down. His face turned a dangerous mottled shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged tight against his expensive silk collar. His absolute authority was being questioned. His total control over the family scapegoat was slipping right in front of his wealthy donors and his golden child daughter. He lost his mind. Arthur leaned all the way forward, grabbing the neck of his desktop microphone with a white-knuckled grip. He didn't just want to punish me anymore. He wanted to eradicate me. If you have ever had to stand completely alone against a toxic family, if you've ever had to draw a hard line in the sand and refuse to let them break you, I need you to stand with me right now. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and type, "I won't break," down in the comments. Let them know they can't crush us. Who the hell do you think you are, Nicole? Arthur screamed, his voice blasting through the PA system. The overhead speakers whined with a sharp, ugly burst of static. He pointed a shaking finger at my shoulder. What is that damn Valkyrie 9 patch supposed to mean? Do you think that piece of fabric makes you special? It's nothing. It's a cheap war toy for a miserable failure who couldn't cut it in the real world. The booming, amplified echo of his voice bounced violently off the wood-paneled walls. It slipped through the cracks of the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. It spilled out into the quiet, marble-floored hallway. Arthur was so high on his own power, so desperately blind in his rage to put me down, that he didn't realize what he had just done. He didn't just insult a dirty piece of canvas. He didn't just insult me. He screamed a classified military call sign through a public loudspeaker. And standing right outside those heavy oak doors, completely unnoticed, was the Reaper himself. The harsh metallic screech of the public address system was still ringing in the air. Arthur's voice calling my unit a cheap war toy, calling me a miserable failure, echoed out into the quiet, marble-floored hallway. Then the world exploded. The heavy oak double doors at the back of courtroom 7B did not just open. They were kicked violently off their brass latch. The solid wood slammed against the plaster walls with the force of a bomb going off. The sound was a deafening, sharp crack of metal and wood. Half the people in the gallery physically jumped in their seats. Heads snapped backward, necks craned. The dust in the air seemed to stop moving. A man stepped through the doorway, 6'3", shoulders like a reinforced concrete bunker, close-cropped gray hair. He was not wearing a tailored designer suit like the politicians in the front row. He wore a standard-issue operational camouflage pattern combat uniform. The fabric was stiff, rugged, and completely unbothered by the polished civilian world around it. Pinned to his chest, catching the harsh glare of the fluorescent lights, were the dull, matte black shapes of 4 heavy stars. General Marcus Hawthorne, commander of Special Operations, the man who owned the dark. He stepped into the room. He did not rush. He did not stomp or wave his arms. He walked down the center aisle with the heavy, measured glide of a man used to commanding strike teams, not local lawyers. His combat boots hit the polished floorboards. Thud, thud, thud. The sound was a steady mechanical rhythm. It felt like a hammer driving thick iron nails into a coffin. The central air conditioning was still pumping cold air through the overhead vents, but the oxygen in the room completely vanished. The atmospheric pressure dropped so fast it made your ears pop. Down at the defense table, the frantic rattling of heavy steel chains suddenly stopped. Elias Thorne froze. The exhausted, beaten-down Army Ranger sat up straight. He ignored the raw, bleeding skin around his wrists. He stared at the 4 stars walking down the aisle, and the posture of a trained soldier locked right back into his spine. General Hawthorne ignored the swinging wooden gate that separated the public gallery from the court floor. He pushed right through it. He walked straight up to the witness box. He did not look at Arthur. He did not look at Evelyn. He stepped cleanly between me and the 2 large bailiffs. He became a physical wall of federal authority. The lead bailiff took a fast step backward. His hand dropped entirely away from his leather duty belt. His partner shrank back, eyes wide, bumping into the wooden railing. Hawthorne slowly turned his head. His eyes were cold, dead flint. He looked at the 2 guards. "Nobody touches her," he said. He did not yell. He pitched his voice low. It was pure gravel and iron. It did not bounce off the walls like Arthur's pathetic emotional screaming. It sank straight through the floorboards and grabbed everyone in the room by the throat. Up on the bench, Arthur Vance completely lost his color. The angry, arrogant purple flush drained out of his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly, pale gray sheet of skin. The heavy wooden gavel slipped right out of his sweating fingers. It hit his desk with a dull, hollow clatter and rolled off into his lap. Arthur swallowed hard. His Adam's apple bobbed over his expensive silk tie. He tried to puff his chest out. He desperately tried to remember he was a judge in his own county, surrounded by his own people. "Excuse me," Arthur stammered. His voice cracked. He leaned toward his microphone, his hands visibly shaking against the wood. "You are interfering with a legal proceeding. This is my courtroom." General Hawthorne slowly turned his neck. He locked his eagle eyes with the man sitting high on the bench. "You just ordered local security to put their hands on a cleared field operative of the United States Armed Forces," the general said. His words cut through the dead air like a surgical blade. "She carries top-tier federal security clearance. You try to strip her in public, Judge, and I will bypass your local jurisdiction entirely. I will drag you out of that chair and put you in front of a federal military tribunal for treason. Do you want to test that theory?" Silence. Absolute suffocating silence. Nobody moved. Nobody blinked. Down at the prosecution table, Evelyn's mouth was hanging slightly open. Her confident, arrogant smirk was entirely gone. The blood rushed out of her face. Her perfectly manicured fingers went totally slack. The expensive silver pen she was holding slipped from her grip. It hit the mahogany table. Click. It rolled over the edge and fell to the carpet. In the front row of the gallery, Richard Sterling sat completely frozen. The billionaire real estate mogul. The man who bought police chiefs and funded judicial campaigns with dirty money. The heavy stench of his Cohiba cigar suddenly smelled like fear. Sterling stared at the 4 stars on Hawthorne's chest. His jaw tightened. In that exact second, the billionaire realized something terrifying. All his dark money, all his local political favors, all his country club handshakes. They meant absolutely nothing. His deep pockets were just loose change. He was throwing pennies at a nuclear submarine. The arrogant local empire of the Vance family was crushed into fine powder. They built a fake castle out of local corruption, and the federal government just parked a tank on their front lawn. They were paralyzed. The room was mine. I looked at Arthur's pale, sweating face. I looked down at Evelyn's shaking hands. I didn't need the general to protect me. I just needed him to lock the doors so the rats couldn't run. I raised my scarred hand. I grabbed the cold metal zipper of my blood-stained jacket, and I pulled it down. The threat of a federal military tribunal hung in the freezing air of courtroom 7B. Arthur Vance sat frozen on his high bench, looking like a man who had just swallowed a mouthful of broken glass. The billionaire Richard Sterling was a rigid statue in the front row of the gallery. General Hawthorne didn't move an inch. He just stood there, a solid wall of federal authority blocking the courthouse bailiffs. Nobody was ordering me to do a damn thing anymore. I looked down at the heavy metal zipper at my collarbone. I pinched it between my scarred fingers and pulled it down. Screech. The sharp sound of the metal teeth separating cut right through the dead silence. I shoved the heavy blood-stained tactical canvas off my shoulders. It slid down my arms. I let it drop. It hit the wooden railing of the witness stand with a heavy, muffled thud. A small puff of dry dust kicked up from the worn fabric. Underneath, I was wearing standard-issue short-sleeved hospital scrubs. Faded blue cotton. For the first time since I got back from the sandbox, I let the whole world see exactly what my family called a disgrace. My bare arms were entirely exposed under the harsh white fluorescent lights. The skin from my left elbow all the way up to my shoulder was a ruined landscape of thick, angry burn grafts. The tissue was twisted, raised, and knotted where the trauma surgeons had desperately tried to piece me back together. Just below my collarbone sat two deep, puckered through and through bullet divots. Ugly, jagged craters permanently sunk into the muscle. A collective sharp gasp sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the gallery. Over at the defense table, the heavy steel chains rattled. Elias Thorne dropped his head. He pressed his forehead hard against the edge of the mahogany table. I saw the moisture hit the dark wood. The ranger was crying, not for himself. He was crying for me. General Hawthorne turned his head. His cold, flinty eyes scanned the twisted scar tissue on my arms. He didn't look away. He didn't offer a pathetic civilian look of pity. He shifted his weight. His heavy combat boots snapped together. Clack. He raised his right hand, a rigid textbook military salute. Hand perfectly straight fingertips, touching the edge of his brow. "My men came home because of you, Valkyrie 9, Hawthorne said. His voice was absolute granite. All of them. That salute was a physical blow. It hit Arthur Vance right in his arrogant face. The family scapegoat, the daughter they treated like dirty, blue-collar trash, was standing in their pristine courtroom being honored as a living legend by a 4-star general. I didn't smile. I gave Hawthorne a single sharp nod. I stepped fully up into the witness box. I planted my feet, spine straight, shoulders back. David Ross, the exhausted public defender, stood up. He looked at me, then looked over at the prosecution table. Evelyn was practically shrinking inside her $2,000 white blazer. "Dr. Reese," Ross said, clearing his dry throat. "You treated Julian Sterling when he was brought into the trauma bay 3 weeks ago. Could you please give this court your professional medical assessment of his injuries?" Evelyn shot out of her chair. The legs of her leather seat shrieked against the floorboards. "Objection. She is not an impartial expert. She is a hostile witness making up wild theories to protect a violent criminal." She looked up at the bench, fully expecting her father to slam his gavel and shut me down like he always did, to silence the black sheep. But Arthur was sweating profusely. A thick bead of sweat rolled down his temple and soaked right into his silk collar. He cast a terrified glance at General Hawthorne, who was still standing right next to the witness box, arms crossed, waiting. Arthur swallowed hard. "Overruled." Arthur choked out, his voice weak and trembling. "The witness will answer." Evelyn's mouth dropped open. Her own father just threw her under the bus to save his own skin. I looked right at Evelyn. I looked at her the same way I look at a cockroach crawling across a sterile operating room floor. "Patient Julian Sterling suffered multiple facial fractures," I said. My voice was completely flat, cold, clinical, and deadly. But the injury of note was a severe compression fracture of the radial styloid on his right wrist. I let the medical term hang in the air for a second. Let them choke on it. Anatomy does not lie. I continued staring dead into Evelyn's panicked eyes. That specific bone break is a forced leverage trauma. It does not happen from a simple fall to the pavement. It does not happen from throwing a punch. It only happens when the wrist is violently suddenly snapped backward while the fingers are actively and tightly locked around a solid, rigid object. The jury box went completely still. He wasn't defending himself with empty hands. I said my words dropping like hammer strikes. He was holding a weapon, a knife. He refused to drop it, and the defendant broke his grip to save a civilian's life. Evelyn lost her mind. Her entire fabricated case was collapsing in front of the local press. She slammed both of her manicured hands down on the prosecution table so hard her diamond ring cracked against the wood. Cold sweat broke out across her forehead, ruining her expensive makeup. "Speculation!" she shrieked. Her voice was high, desperate, and manic. Total, unfounded speculation. The police searched that alley top to bottom. Detective Grimes was on the scene. There was no knife found. None. You can't prove a damn thing without a physical weapon. She laughed. A sick, crazy sound. She was banking everything on the fact that she and Grimes had erased the evidence. No weapon means no self-defense, she yelled, pointing a shaking finger at Elias. He's guilty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just smirked. A slow, cold predator's smile. I reached down to the wooden railing where my camouflage jacket was resting. I slipped my scarred hand right into the deep inner breast pocket. Evelyn's shrill voice bounced off the heavy oak walls. She was hyperventilating, pointing her shaking finger at the defense table. She wanted blood. She wanted the fake reality she built to hold together for just 5 more minutes. I ignored her completely. My scarred hand reached into the heavy canvas folds of the tactical jacket resting on the railing. My fingers brushed past the rough fabric and found what I was looking for. I pulled it out. A single piece of yellow carbon paper, folded into tight, perfect quarters. The room went dead quiet as I pinched the edges and slowly unfolded it. The crisp, stiff paper crackled. A sharp, dry sound that cut right through Evelyn's frantic, ragged breathing. I smoothed the creases flat against the wooden railing of the witness box. I didn't look at my stepsister. I looked straight up at the bench, straight at Arthur. San Diego County General Hospital. I read. My voice was a flat mechanical drone. Evidence chain of custody receipt. Document number 409. Arthur stopped breathing. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin looking like wet ash. Item 1, folding knife, 4-inch blade, tactical grip. I looked up, locking eyes with Detective Grimes. The dirty cop looked like he had just taken a bullet to the gut. Recovered directly from the inner jacket pocket of patient Julian Sterling at 23:40 hours, covered entirely in the victim's blood. I slid the yellow paper forward. It rested right on the edge of the wood, a glaring neon sign of their destruction. I pulled it out of his coat myself, I said. I bagged it. I signed the intake form. I stamped it, and I locked it inside a steel biometrically sealed narcotics safe in Trauma Bay 3. Evelyn's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Her knees literally buckled, hitting the edge of the prosecution table to keep herself standing. It's sitting in the dark right now, I told them, dropping my voice to a cold whisper. Safe and sound, just waiting for the FBI to come cut the lock. The illusion shattered. The entire rigged system collapsed in a matter of seconds. Grimes took a hard, desperate step backward. His heavy leather shoes squeaked loudly against the polished floorboards. He bumped hard into a chair, knocking it over with a loud crash. He knew exactly what tampering with a felony crime scene meant. He was looking at a decade in a federal penitentiary. In the front row of the gallery, Richard Sterling shot up from his seat. The billionaire's face was twisted in pure panic. His hands were balled into tight fists. He had built his entire real estate empire on buying local favors. He bought Grimes. He bought Evelyn. He funded Arthur's re-election. But all the dark money in his offshore accounts couldn't hack a hospital's biometrics safe, and it sure as hell couldn't buy off the federal government. Sterling turned on his heel. He shoved his way past the wooden swinging doors, abandoning his son's fake defense, abandoning the Vance family, running to call his crisis lawyers. Then the real betrayal started. Dog eat dog. General Hawthorne didn't say a single word. He just stood there, his massive arms crossed over his chest, staring straight up at the bench. His silence was heavier than any physical threat. It was an executioner waiting for the trapdoor to drop. Arthur Vance felt the weight of that stare. The arrogant, untouchable judge was trapped. A heavy drop of sweat rolled off his chin and hit the mahogany desk with a wet smack. He looked at the yellow paper. He looked at the 4 metal stars on Hawthorne's shoulder. Then he looked down at his golden child daughter. When a narcissist's survival is on the line, loyalty does not exist. Arthur grabbed his wooden gavel with a shaking, slick hand. He didn't look at Evelyn with a father's love. He looked at her like a liability. A rotten piece of meat he needed to cut loose immediately to save his own federal pension and his own freedom. Bang! Bang! The gavel hit the wood. The strikes were frantic and weak. "This court," Arthur stammered. His voice cracked violently. He cleared his throat desperately, trying to project his usual booming authority. "This court has zero tolerance for evidence tampering. Detective Grimes, you are suspended immediately pending a full internal affairs investigation." Grimes stared at the judge, his jaw locked in pure, unfiltered hatred. Furthermore, Arthur rushed on, completely refusing to meet his daughter's terrified eyes. "Given the severe implications of prosecutorial misconduct, I am ordering an immediate inquiry into the actions of Assistant District Attorney Evelyn Vance." "Dad!" Evelyn shrieked, her voice shattered. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. "Dad! What are you doing? You can't do this to me. Tell them!" Arthur ignored her. He looked right past his favorite child, treating her like she didn't even exist. He looked at Hawthorne silently, begging the general for mercy. "All charges against Elias Thorne are hereby dismissed with prejudice." Arthur practically yelled the words, tumbling over each other. "The defendant is cleared. Court is adjourned." He slammed the gavel down one last time. The sound was hollow, pathetic. The room exploded into chaos. Reporters scrambled over the benches, rushing for the hallway doors. The bailiff, moving like he was walking on broken glass, walked slowly over to the defense table. He pulled a small silver key from his black leather belt. Clack, clack. The heavy steel cuffs popped open. Elias rubbed his raw, bleeding wrists. He stood up, towering over the room, a free man. He looked at me and gave a single slow nod. That was all the thanks a ranger ever needed to give. I turned away from the witness stand. I started walking down the center aisle, ready to leave the stench of this family behind forever. "Nicole, wait." I stopped. Arthur scrambled down from the high bench. His black judicial robe tangled around his legs. He rushed down the wooden steps and stepped right into my path. He was breathing hard. His face was slick with oily sweat. The fake, arrogant mask was entirely gone, replaced by the desperate, pathetic face of a coward who realized he had just bet his life on the wrong horse. "Nicole, listen to me," Arthur pleaded. His voice dropped to a frantic, sickeningly sweet whisper. He held his hands out, palms up, trying to look harmless. "I didn't know. You have to believe me. I had no idea what Evelyn was doing behind my back. I was lied to. We're family, Nicole. You understand, right? Family has to stick together." He reached out to touch my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I just took one slow, deliberate step backward. My eyes were dead flat. I looked at his trembling hands, then up to his sweating face. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. "Forgiveness doesn't mean access," I said. My voice was a dry, hollow rasp. "And you are not my father." I didn't wait for his reaction. I turned on my heel. My combat boots hit the floor in a steady, heavy rhythm. I walked straight past the trembling judge, straight past my sobbing stepsister, and walked right toward the open oak doors. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 7B swung shut behind me. The thick wood completely muffled the frantic, pathetic shouting of Arthur Vance and the frantic sobbing of my stepsister. The courthouse hallway was dead quiet. Cold marble floors, harsh fluorescent lights, and one man waiting by the elevator banks. General Marcus Hawthorne stood with his hands resting easily on his tactical belt. He didn't offer a fake civilian smile. He didn't offer empty platitudes about how sorry he was that my family turned out to be a pack of toxic liars. Soldiers don't do that. As I walked up to him, he stepped forward, closing the distance. He reached a massive hand into the breast pocket of his combat uniform. He pulled his fist out and pressed something hard, round, and heavy directly into the center of my right palm. His thick fingers closed my hand over it. I didn't need to open my fist to know what it was. I could feel the solid, freezing weight of heavy brass. I could feel the raised, textured ridges of the enamel crest digging sharply into my skin. A commander's challenge coin, the ultimate unspoken mark of absolute respect in the armed forces. You can't buy it. You can't politic your way into getting one. You earn it by bleeding in the dirt. Hawthorne looked at me. He gave one sharp, singular nod. A silent transaction of mutual respect between two people who knew exactly what the cost of survival looked like. He didn't say a word. He just turned on his heel, his heavy combat boots echoing down the long corridor, taking his protective storm back to Washington. I stood alone in the quiet hallway. I opened my hand. The dull gold and black metal rested on my scarred palm. I stared at it for a long second, then shoved it deep into my front pocket. I grabbed my heavy tactical canvas jacket off my arm. I didn't hide my skin anymore. I wasn't ashamed of the twisted, ugly burn grafts running up my arm or the deep bullet craters sunk into my shoulder. I spent 32 years letting my arrogant family convince me those scars made me broken. They were wrong. Those scars were the physical receipts for every single life my unit saved. I swung the heavy canvas over my shoulders. I slid my arms through the sleeves and pulled the collar tight. I reached up and tapped 2 fingers against the Velcro Valkyrie 9 patch on my right shoulder. Once, a hard, grounding habit. I walked to the front entrance of the courthouse. I shoved both hands against the heavy glass doors and pushed them wide open. The shift was violent. The stale, suffocating smell of lemon wood polish, old money, and toxic family secrets was instantly ripped away. The harsh, bright San Diego sunlight slammed into my face. It was warm. It was real. The air tasted like heavy salt blowing off the Pacific Ocean, mixed with the harsh exhaust fumes of city traffic. I closed my eyes. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the ocean air all the way down to the bottom of my lungs. My chest felt completely hollowed out, light. The crushing, suffocating weight I had been carrying for my entire life was just gone. There was no magical family reconciliation. There was no tearful hug with my stepfather. There didn't need to be. Sometimes the only way to cure a disease is a clean surgical removal of the rotting tissue. I cut them off, and I finally survived. A heavy set of footsteps hit the concrete steps right behind me. Scuff, scuff. Elias Thorne pushed through the glass doors. He didn't walk a step behind me like a subordinate. He didn't step in front of me like some overbearing protector. He pulled up right beside me, shoulder to shoulder, equal ground. He looked exhausted. The deep purple bruises on his jaw were swelling fast, and his wrists were wrapped in raw, bloody rings from the rusted police shackles. But his posture was completely straight. He looked down at my left arm. He saw the violent network of scars exposed where my sleeve was rolled up. There was zero pity in his eyes, no shock. Only the exact same quiet understanding he'd given me in that sterile hospital room 8 months ago. He didn't promise to pay me back. He didn't offer a long emotional speech. "Shift starts in 2 hours, Doc." Elias grunted. His voice was rough, dry as sandpaper. I looked at him. I gave a slow nod. "Let's go to work, Ranger." We walked down the wide concrete steps together, moving away from the courthouse, moving toward the hospital, moving back to the only place in the city that actually mattered, the trauma bay. The place where I wasn't a scapegoat, where I wasn't a disappointment, where I was the person standing between the reaper and the dying. I learned a hard, ugly lesson today. You cannot choose the bloodline you are born into. You cannot force toxic, narcissistic people to suddenly wake up, look at you, and recognize your actual worth. You will bleed yourself dry trying to get water from a stone. Real family isn't written on a birth certificate. It isn't a legal obligation. Chosen family is the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you in the absolute dark. The ones who take the hit for you when the rest of the world turns its back. The ones who look at your deepest, ugliest scars and see a survivor, not a victim. Listen to me. If you are listening to this right now, and you know exactly what it feels like to stand completely alone against the people who were supposed to protect you. If you have ever had to build a steel wall and set a hard boundary just to keep yourself breathing, I want you to stand with me right now. Drop a comment down below and type, "I choose my own family." Share your story. Tell me about the moment you finally stopped trying to please them and walked away from the toxicity. Hit that like button to show you survived and subscribe to the channel so we keep this unit growing. You are not broken. Your strength is infinitely bigger than the lies they told you. Keep fighting,